The words were soft, almost drowned beneath the clatter of cutlery, the low hum of conversation, and the faint jazz music playing in the upscale restaurant. Yet to the man sitting at the polished mahogany table, those words cut deeper than any sound in the room. He looked up slowly, his fork still hovering midair. The girl standing before him couldn't have been more than 16. Her hair was messy, strands sticking out like she had combed it with her fingers, and her clothes, though once belonging to someone who had cared, were faded, patched, and clinging to her small frame. But it wasn't her hunger-worn cheeks or trembling hands that held him. It was her eyes. They were wide, luminous, and far older than her years. Pools of resilience, lined with pain and pride, and yet still carrying a flicker of hope, as though she refused to let the world completely break her. For a moment, he said nothing. His mind ran through a dozen questions. Why her? Why now? Why was she asking him, a man who had enough money to buy not just this meal but the entire restaurant, 10 times over? The waiter appeared, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, I'll have her removed immediately," he whispered, his tone brisk, embarrassed at the intrusion. But the millionaire raised his hand to stop him. "No," he said quietly. Then, turning back to the girl, he pushed his plate gently toward her. "Take it." Her thin fingers hesitated as though afraid it might vanish if she moved too quickly. She took the plate, clutching it close. Instead of sitting there to eat like others might, she walked back toward the corner of the restaurant. A boy sat waiting there, smaller than her little brother, his ribs visible under his shirt. She placed the plate before him with the reverence of a feast. The boy's eyes lit up, and he devoured the food with shaking hands while she simply watched him, smiling softly. The millionaire felt something stir inside him. A memory long buried. Years ago, he too had known hunger. He hadn't always been Edward Grayson, the man of steel towers and empires. Once, he had been a boy shivering in an alleyway, with nothing but the sound of his stomach echoing in the night. But life had changed after a stranger extended a hand. He had vowed never to forget. Yet somewhere along the climb, as the millions grew, he had buried that boy. Now, watching her eyes, it all came back. He stood and walked toward the corner, ignoring the startled gazes of the wealthy diners around him. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl straightened, as though bracing herself for scolding. "Lila, sir." "And him?" He nodded toward the boy. "My brother, Daniel. He's 9. Where are your parents?" She lowered her gaze. "Gone." Silence hung between them. The millionaire, with all his polished suit and power, felt suddenly small in the presence of her honesty. "Do you live on the streets?" he asked gently. She nodded once, gripping her brother's hand protectively. "We manage." He studied her. No child should speak of survival with such calm, as though it were normal. His chest tightened. "Come with me," he said at last. Her eyes widened again, suspicion flickering there. "Why?" "Because I don't believe you should have to beg for leftovers," he said, his voice steady. "And because, once, I was like you." The words must have carried weight, because she didn't move to run. Instead, she looked at her brother, who clutched her sleeve. He nodded, trusting her. That night, Edward brought them to his mansion. It was vast, lined with marble floors and glittering chandeliers, yet somehow felt empty compared to the small smile on Daniel's face when he saw the hot food waiting on the table. Lila didn't eat much. She was too busy watching Daniel fill his stomach for the first time in days. Edward noticed. He ordered more food and gently told her, "Eat." She obeyed at last, cautiously, like a bird unused to plenty. Over the following days, he learned their story. Their mother had died years ago. Their father, a factory worker, had been injured and later passed. They had bounced between relatives who couldn't, or wouldn't, keep them, until finally they ended up on the streets. Lila had been keeping them alive with scraps, often going hungry herself so Daniel could eat. Edward's heart ached at her resilience. He found himself rearranging meetings, spending more time at home just to sit with them. Lila was wary at first, always holding back, as if waiting for the world to snatch this fragile safety away. But slowly, she softened. She began to laugh. Soft, musical, and it filled the house more than any expensive ornament could. One evening, Edward sat across from her at the long dining table. "Do you still think of the streets?" he asked. "Every night," she admitted. I dream of them. The cold, the hunger, and then I wake up here, and it doesn't feel real. It's real, he said firmly. And you don't ever have to go back. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears of weakness, but of release. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe safety might last. Months passed. Edward arranged schooling for both children, tutors, and counselors to help them heal. Daniel thrived quickly. His laughter filled the halls, his drawings covered the walls. Lila, though, still carried the scars of responsibility. She excelled in her studies, but always kept a watchful eye on her brother, as though fearing he might vanish. One afternoon, Edward found her sitting in the garden, a book unopened on her lap. She looked at him, and he saw again those same eyes, the ones that had stopped him in the restaurant. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He sat beside her. "Because someone once looked into my eyes and saw a boy worth saving. I didn't believe it then. But they did. And it changed everything. Now it's my turn to do the same." She blinked, silent, as tears slipped down her cheeks. That moment sealed it. She was no longer just a stranger he'd helped. She was family. Years later, the story of Edward Grayson's empire would be told alongside the story of the girl who asked for leftovers. But to Edward, the true fortune wasn't in his towers or his bank accounts. It was in the laughter echoing through his once empty mansion, in Daniel's bright eyes, and in the strength of a girl who taught him again what it meant to be human. And whenever people asked Lila about that night, about why she approached him, she would always smile and say, "Because when I looked into his eyes, I saw someone who remembered."